Hello, everyone. Welcome to another PGS Talks. My name is Paulo Spironi, and it's my great pleasure to introduce this PGS Talks, enabling local connections to drive systemic global change, empowering the youth ecosystem. Today, I have the pleasure to share the stage with Abdullahi Alim, Prime Board member, and also the manager of the World Economic Forum Global Shapers Community. Abdullahi Alim is award-winning community organizer who leads the Davos Lab at the World Economic Forum, a policy and impact aggregator for nations seeking to rebuild post-pandemic systems with young people and unborn generations in mind. The Davos Lab is the world's first youth recovery effort permission on the views, ideas, and concern of 2 million young people from around the world. Abdullahi, my friend, welcome again. Thanks for accepting our invitation. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Paulo, and thank you to all the young people and just really everyone who's on the line today for this discussion. I hope you're enjoying the conference. And I know we have a session actually right after this one too, which is about showing some of the initiatives from Oceania, Middle East, and Asia at large too. So I'll try to make this as concise of a presentation as possible. You know, I want to take you back to the very beginning of the pandemic. This was, for me at least, around February of 2020. And already the warning signs were becoming very clear. It was very clear that there will be a generation of students who, for the first time, will have to take their education, if they still have that privilege to do so, online. It was the first time where workplaces, if you had the privilege to do this again, went remote. But I think even deeper than that, we were already beginning to see some of the horrific estimates of the number of people who were going to lose due to this pandemic. We already had some of the estimates of the kind of economic collapse we were anticipating from this downturn too. And for me, it made me reflect on what can I do as somebody who works with a lot of young people? What is it that I can do? And what are some of the lessons that I can share to other young people who also want to create change? And that really is the point of my presentation today. During the pandemic, I led an initiative called the Davos Lab. And it was really an attempt to figure out, what does this pandemic and its consequences mean specifically to young people and children born after this pandemic? What are some of the consequences that will come to rise? And how do we make sure that we protect the rights and interests of future generations? In thinking about 2020 and thinking about this kind of like, biggest recession in 100 years, biggest public health crisis of the last 100 years, biggest social justice crisis of the last 100 years, it made me think of the other young people that I've heard in the years before. I remember in 2019, we had Greta Thunberg from Fridays for the Future at one of our sessions as a speaker. And in that session, she spoke very, very honestly and candidly about how, despite the many efforts to protest and go out there into the streets, nothing really has changed. It also made me think of another presentation we had when we invited Dr. Mika White. He's one of the co-founders of the Occupy Wall Street movement, which was very popular in 2011. And he too also said that social change as we know it is dead. And these kind of very serious and very profound messages made me think, what will it take? What are some of the lessons that we as young people need to think about very, very profoundly if we are to create real systemic long-term change? And for me, I have 4 lessons that I want to share with you. The first one is called learn from the past, listen to the future. Learn from the past reminds us that even as we might have the best amount of energy and enthusiasm to create social change, in all honesty, we're not the first. We're not the first generation of young people in human history to want to create change, who recognize that there's going to be a big issue ahead of us if nobody acts. In fact, every generation of young people before us have gone through the same thinking. And it's important for us to delve into the lessons of the past. What happened, for example, when previous generations of young change makers attempted to create social change, whether it relates to the climate, whether it relates to economic inequality, whatever the issue might be. In looking at those lessons, we understand two things. One, where did those movements succeed? How do we model the same behaviors as them? And also, what were some of their shortcomings? Why is it that they weren't able to achieve the kind of success that they were built out to do? And really contending with those lessons make us a bit more prepared, a bit more strategic in how we also create social change too. You learn from the past, but you also listen to the future. I don't care if you are 18, if you are 30, if you are 35, if you are 40, whatever group of young people you represent, there is always a generation of young people before you. And if we are serious about saying future generations should listen, previous generations should listen to our demands, then we also need to do the exact same when it comes to listening to future generations and the world that they are more likely to inherit as well. The first very important lesson, learn from the past, listen to the future. It makes your activism a lot sharper. The second one, which is very important, is diagnose and understand. I think one of the big challenges in today's social change world is that we incentivize and celebrate people who have solutions. But sometimes there's a risk of being too solution oriented. Sometimes there's a risk in just jumping into a sector and saying, this is the right approach. Because often at times we begin to fall into something known as the Heropreneur Complex. The idea that we will be the hero to save a community, a group of people, a social issue for that matter. And that the only way to create social change is by being that hero at the front. This is completely inaccurate. The best thing sometimes that we can do is actually step back, observe, understand, try to make sense of why is this issue still persisting in my local community? Who are some of the people who are trying to create social change? How do we support their existing initiatives instead of just replicating again and again and again? It really is a call for humility when I say diagnose, because to truly solve an issue, you have to really understand it very intimately. As you would not, for example, as I often say, go to a doctor that doesn't have a medical degree. At the same way, to create truly effective social change, to create effective solutions, you first have to study social change. You have to first study the social issue. And that's a very important factor to kind of consider as well. Unfortunately, the reality is the entire youth change ecosystem doesn't support people who are learning, who are observing, and who are supporting. For example, by learning, by observing, by supporting, which is really the most effective ways to create social change, it's unlikely you'll end up on a Forbes 30 under 30 list. By learning, observing, and supporting, it's very unlikely that you'll become a big paid speaker traveling around the world to speak at different conferences. By learning, observing, and by supporting, it's also very unlikely that you'll have a large social media following. But that's the cost. That's the cost for creating social change. You have to sometimes let go of all the shiny that sometimes distract us from what we are trying to do and really go back to the basics. Understand, why does this issue persist at the rate that it is still persisting today, even though many people beforehand have tried to change this? Why is it that this issue still shows up? How does it show up? Who benefits from this problem still showing up? And then the third one, who's doing work? It could be, for example, maybe a local city councilor. It could be an existing organization. It could be just somebody out there who's already doing the change and just needs volunteers. Sometimes the best way to create, in fact, the best way, period, to create social change is by being in the shadows, by not necessarily falling to the Heropreneur Complex. So a reminder, the first two lessons, learn from the past, listen to the future. And the second one is really about understanding problems, understanding them intimately. The third one is about knowing when you should step up and knowing when you should not step up. I believe in gender equality. I'm going to give you myself as an example. I believe in gender equality. I believe in supporting the agenda of gender equality, for example. But I think there's also a place for me as a man in the movement to be more of a supporter than to be the face, for example, because I don't have lived experience when it comes to gender inequality. You know, in the same way, if you are trying to tackle economic inequality, and you might come from, let's say, a very wealthy background, Again, are you the right person to step up and really be the person who's at the front? Or again, is it better if we just sit in the back and support those who are at the front, who should be the face of some of these movements? I think of a very famous example in the US of a movement called, I think it was Can You Not? It was called Can You Not? And Can You Not was designed to make sure that people who don't represent the experiences of certain communities, so let's say if you are very wealthy, white, American, and now from Harvard, and then tomorrow you want to become the representative for a largely poor, working class community, Black, brown community that live in the Bronx, for example. You know, it's very problematic to be the face of something that you do not represent, because sometimes by being the translator, by positioning yourself as a translator, by positioning yourself as somebody who can represent the interests of other people, you're actually perpetuating their disadvantage. You're actually making it seem like they don't have a voice themselves, and somebody needs to translate their words to make it reasonable for somebody else to understand. Can You Not invites us to sit back sometimes and allow those who have more lived experience to step up at the front. And the last one very quickly is, remember, you are the very first example of a system. You can't create systemic change outside when you compromise your own system. And by that, I mean mental health and well-being. If you are having questions that ask you, am I doing enough? Am I enough? If you are committing so much of yourself to social change that you no longer have a friend group, that you're compromising relationships, you're compromising your family structure, you have to always deep down remember, you are the very first system. And if you're compromised, your ability to create change in the wider world will also be limited too. So please make sure to always prioritize your well-being. And in that, those are the 4 key lessons, to be honest, that I've observed in the last decade or so working with young movements to figure out what are the ones that succeed. The ones that succeed are the ones that put well-being at the core of the experience of young people. It's the ones who understand what is the most important thing for me to do. And sometimes that doesn't mean I have to create an initiative. Sometimes it means supporting what's already out there. The third one invites us to understand and learn from the past, almost like an academic study, learn from the past. And the third one asks us to reflect on whether it makes sense for us to be the face, or whether it makes sense, again, for us to be behind the scenes. It's such an important message, I think, for this particular meeting, because the most important change I think we can make as young people, especially if we're students, is on a college campus. It's our most immediate experience. And if you understand the issue of climate change, if you understand profoundly the consequences of inequality, it really is time for us to now understand why these issues are still persisting. What is it that we can do to help our colleges take more significant action, whether it's on the curriculum, whether it's in regards to the endowment funds that our colleges have. Understand what has happened and why is it that change is not happening, and see where we can help support while also safeguarding our mental health. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, my friend, my dear friend Abdullahi Alim, for such inspiring and provocative words, and for sharing the 4 key lessons you have. And definitely thanks for the call of taking care of ourselves. We always forgot that in the end, our first system is our body, is our minds, and it's very important to take care about that. Thank you so much again for accepting our invitation, for sharing these amazing lessons with us. And then now I kindly invite all the audience to check out our next panel and meet the impactful student initiatives in Oceania, Asia, and the Middle East. All these initiatives are part of the Prime Global Student Network, and there is a lot to be learned with them. Okay, thank Abdullahi. Stay safe, take care, and thank you all the audience. Bye-bye.
Bye.